there's a penny on the floor. I don't know if this is payment or penny for your thoughts or an early offering or what, but indeed. I want an introduction, help you to get a connection with all four of the lessons, because that's going to give us the background to dive into a couple of real-life stories of faith. And my prayer is that you'd be thinking about your faith this morning and recognizing that it's a precious gift that God has given. You have faith. You don't manufacture it. It is a gift of God in you by the Spirit. We all function in all sorts of ways throughout our everyday living with faith. For instance, every time you take your credit card and swipe it, don't you have faith that you're going to be approved? Oh, it's just wonderful. Every once in a while, I'll have fun with the cashier, and I'll just put my arms in the air. I'm approved. This is grass. I'm approved. Because you have some faith, you know. Every time you go through an intersection on a green light, don't you have some faith that on the perpendicular part of it where there is a red light, that people are going to stop? Sometimes it goes awry, but you believe that. When you went to bed last night and hopefully said your prayers, didn't you have faith that the sun would come up this morning? And isn't it a beautiful day? I did a wedding at the Beaver Creek Chapel yesterday morning, 11:30. And I mean, we were so fortunate that the snow was sort of blowing off the leaves in the brilliant yellow color. And one of the guests was surprised that we didn't have stained glass windows at the Beaver Creek Chapel. And I just thought, you nitwit. Take a look through the windows at God's unbelievable color. I didn't say that out loud. I kept that to myself. But as we look at these lessons, they're about faith. I want you to be thinking about your faith today. First of all, in the Lamentations text, it is very sad. It's about the saddest book in the Bible. It's so sad that I advise people that are so wildly happy and can't get off their high to read Lamentations. It'll bring you down. There's 5 chapters in it. It's the history of Israel after they've been utterly conquered. The temple has been torn down, destroyed. The people of influence, the people with talent and skills are carted off to Baghdad to be in bondage to another nation. And Lamentations in the 5 chapters, they realize that because they've forsaken the faith, this terrible thing is taking place. Read it carefully. They're desolate. They're sad. There's weeping. There's tears. The young women have no joy. And they realize the consequences of living apart from a life of faith with God. It is so low, as you read and study Lamentations, that they're actually thinking that God's gotten so tired of them that they're no more. I mean, is that the depths of despair? But I find it very interesting in Bible study. You can't read even a book like that where there's not a little bit of hope. If you read in chapter 3, verse 22, it's the only hope that's in there, by the way. But it says God's mercies are forever. His love is new every morning. Isn't that a beautiful verse? Now the psalm that we did responsively is about Israel's journeying into their captivity. And it's sad. And it's because the faith has been broken and they haven't trusted God. And here's their end. They're walking off into what's going to be a 40-year slavery. And their captors are saying, sing us a song. How could you sing a song? The image is we've hung our harps on the trees. We're not going to make music anymore. As Jim rightly said, on that depressing note, the last verse, there's just bitterness in their hearts. We hope someday somebody will get even with you. How is this for hatefulness? But it's in their pain. We hope your children are taken and dashed to the ground. Does somebody have to be low, beaten down, to want to say that? The quick Israel history, it begins in faith. God calls Abraham. Guess what? Abraham believes God, and he goes to the land God tells him because he trusts. He's a person of faith. That is our ancient relative, and his entire significance is about being a person of faith and trusting God. You move through Israelite history. Remember, you come to the time of Solomon? He wasn't a real good king. He was real smart. But I can't imagine being smart and trying to have 1,000 wives. He let their religions become his religions, and he really lost the faith, or forsook the faith. And from that point on, you have a succession in the northern and southern kingdom of the kings being really faithless. And it leads to the destruction of a nation. And so I'm really glad that we didn't just have those two lessons. Because you come to the epistle lesson, the Apostle Paul is in prison. He ought to be as sad as can be. He's writing a letter to a young pastor in the city of Ephesus by the name of Timothy. And he's saying, Timothy, you've got the gift of faith. Came to you in the laying on of hands. Timothy! And this has happened to me so many times in my life. Your grandma was a person of faith. Your mother was a person of faith. Now you're a person of faith. Live this faith, and God is going to bless your journey and the work you do. Now, Timothy's not an entirely confident person, and so Paul says, be confident. This is fun in the Greek versions. He doesn't play on words. If you read the text out of the ancient Greek, it's, Timothy, don't be so timid. Isn't that neat? Timidity is to not have, confidence. And so, in these lessons, what's so fun is they go from this picture of life lived without faith and the ultimate destruction of that, and now life in the church lived in faith. And then the gospel lesson. The disciples have been with Jesus for a number of years, and they've been watching his ministry. And this is what they have seen in him. They've seen perfect faith, perfect humility, and God answering and involving himself in the empowerment of that ministry. The disciples had watched Jesus when there were 5,000 people spread out. They didn't have enough food. They'd been listening to Jesus teaching. And that story is so precious, it's included in a number of the Gospels. But the disciples watched Jesus, and here's what they saw. He looked to heaven, raised his hands. How are you going to take care of these hungry people? We don't know exactly how it took place. But he reverenced God. He believed. And there was provision for all of these people. What's the message that the disciples get? Jesus is the perfect person of faith. So it's quite natural when we get to the gospel today, the disciples say, Lord, increase our faith. Doesn't that sound pretty natural? I suppose they'd like to feed 5,000 people. They'd like to heal the blind, the deaf have hearing, the lame walk, all those spectacular things. Maybe that's a part of what's on their minds. But they have understood that what is so important and vital for a healthy, whole, satisfying life is the life of faith, believing and trusting God. Now that last part of the gospel gets a little confusing. As soon as Jesus said, if you just had the faith as tiny as a mustard seed, you tell the mulberry tree to pluck itself up. Mulberry trees have quite big root systems. They don't blow over easy. And it'd land in the ocean. It's phrased differently in one of the other gospels. Today to the mountain, Vail. It wouldn't make skiers very happy. Get up and plant yourself out in the Pacific. And it would obey. But then this context is set. And it's about servanthood. It's about doing the common and ordinary things. And in the ordinariness of life, living as a person who believes and trusts in God. That's what the meaning of that is. And I want to tell two stories very quickly where I've, as a pastor, been privileged to see that. Pastors are so lucky. They get to walk with the members of the congregation. You get to watch faith when it's really tiny and as it grows. It's such a beautiful thing to watch, that nurturing. And I have total permission to tell these stories. And in fact, I'm in contact probably annually with these folks, and they want their stories to be told, to be witnesses to other people, to encourage faith. The first story is about Tony and Anna. I helped to start pretty much started a congregation in Thousand Oaks, California. I was there 10 years. It was just a fun ministry. And people came from all walks of life, and some with Lutheran background, some with nothing, and whatever. It was such a fun experience. Anna Borrego had been born in Switzerland. And she had a conversion experience when she was a really young woman and had a passionate, personal, deep, conversational, loving relationship with Jesus. Jesus was so real to her, and it was just fun to be with her. Her husband, who was a really neat man and would come to church occasionally, was Tony. And Tony was the sheriff of Ventura County. And Tony was Latino. And, he had the most gorgeous black, wavy hair. And when Tony had his sheriff's uniform on, with his big gun, and his billy club, and then his handcuffs, and you looked at Tony, and he had that stature of that Latino man. His shoulders were about like that. He had these little hips like this. And Tony looked like he could walk up to an automobile and pick the side of it up and tip it over. He was the coolest sheriff. Very soft-spoken, very caring. Took one look at him, and you'd never enter a sumo wrestling tournament with a guy like that. Tony's background in faith had been kind of classic Catholic. And the personal nature of hearing the Bible as God's word spoken to you just had never been a part of his experience. He practiced the sacraments, but that deep living of the life of faith in relationship with Jesus, the walk, just wasn't there. Not hostile. This was Anna's mission in life. And every day, she just prayed that Tony would come to a more personal relationship in faith with Jesus Christ. She wanted to share that partnership in her life. And, at church is great. Whenever Tony showed up, everybody liked him, but everybody knew. You kind of look over at Anna. She was praying. Then you started praying. We never rented a convention hall or anything like that to pray for Tony to come to a more personal relationship, but there was a lot of prayers. Tony retired, and that gorgeous black wavy hair now had some gray in it. And he had been prayed over so much that when he had a little more time in retirement, you know what happened? It all sunk in. He loved his wife. It was a great marriage anyway. But he really came to a more profound personal relationship. And I tell that story because, we don't have to feed the 5,000. We don't have to change water to wine. We don't have to get the lame to stand up and walk. But whatever your prayer concern is, if it's offered to God and you're trusting God, somehow in God's providence and in God's wisdom, God will take care of this. Isn't that a great story? Secondly, I tell this second story because things don't always work out the way we want as we have prayed for things. But in fact, as you look in retrospect, God gives us a better gift than we even asked for. I have a very good friend, and Donnie was in the ministry at Thousand Oaks. He was 25 years old. I was well acquainted with him. His folks were pretty devout in our congregation. Saw Donnie half a dozen times a year. Really cool kid. Worked hard in construction. He was a drywall hanger. But Donnie was one of these kids that he lived on the edge and was a thrill seeker. He'd drive from Thousand Oaks into Los Angeles, which usually would take you in commute time about an hour and 10, 20 minutes. That was a good commute time. And he had a Ninja motorcycle. And he used to get to downtown LA in 30 or 40 minutes. If you've ever driven the freeways in Los Angeles, it is scary. You're bumper to bumper in these motorcycles where they're totally laying down on them. Like this. That was Donnie. His dad was into power boating, drag boat racing, and built an incredible drag boat. And in Mission Bay in San Diego, California, there was a water ski event, and it was to see who could ski behind a hot drag boat for a certain period of time and hit the highest speed. Chris, this wasn't your normal slalom ski. This is a ski that's about this wide. And Donnie's dad would drive the boat that he built, and Donnie would ride behind it. And they hit 106 miles an hour. Can you imagine that? Racing. Nuts. Absolutely nuts. And Donnie fell and broke his back. I saw Donnie in the Los Robles Hospital in Thousand Oaks. He had 4 pins in his head. And he was being stretched, and weights were on his legs, hoping that this break in the back would pull apart and would have some hope of mending. I remember the agony of being with his mom and dad and then visiting Donnie every day for a long time. But something, as Donnie's greatest prayer to God, this was his faithful prayer. He had faith. God would let him walk again. Donnie, to this day, and he's a good friend, and we did lots of stuff in church together, is still paralyzed from here down. But God had other plans and didn't forsake him. Donnie never would have got a college education. He became a graduate at Lutheran University in Thousand Oaks. He studied in entrepreneurialism. And he was the first guy to create a catalog of recreational equipment for the handicapped. And started his own brokering house of that and became very wildly successful. Something that never, ever would have happened to him. In fact, President Reagan at that time had Donnie to the White House to give him an award as one of the entrepreneurs. And Donnie writes devotions. He gives all the praise and glory to God. I was with him last March when I went to do a wedding in Pacific Beach, San Diego, and we had a great day together. And well, he's not going to walk again. He's so happy because in faith God has worked in his life. Not in the way that he totally hoped for, but in another way. It's really cool. He says, Pastor Mark, when I go to heaven, guess what? I'm going to walk through the garden with Jesus. Is that faith? Isn't that cool? You have faith. We all have it. What do you do with it? Allow it to be that motivation that invites you to just walk more closely with Christ in your everyday life. Your everyday life. And those of you that have kids, they're going to bring home their coloring thing. Did you see how I was setting them up to attack you? So that you would not forget the sermon? And this is the frog. And how do we spell frog? F-R-O-G. And what does frog remind us of? Fully relying on God. Wow. You got it. And I'm going to take this penny and put it in the offering. God's rich blessings to all of you. It's just a pleasure to be